I think I became first interested in cultural resources before we called them that. And it took me some time, as it often does for us, to make connections and find words for it. But I had the experience of being a child at West Point, which is on the Hudson River. And my father was stationed there, and he took me along a walkway along the riverbanks that had artifacts and so forth along the way. And they have a piece of the chain that was stretched across the river. I won't name the battle because I'm not a historian and I'll probably get it wrong. But it was kind of interesting because as we went along, there was a story that went with each thing that we looked at, whether it was a statue, a plaque, a piece of the chain. And it struck me then that this was not just a walk through a park or a landscape, that there was a piece of it. I wouldn't know to call it a cultural resource then, but this was part of the background, the history, and the tradition of the point, as they call it. And it was a teaching syllabus. It was really a teaching syllabus for all these different concepts, and some about history, some about chivalry, some about military tradition. So then kind of fast forward, you know, everywhere I went as a military brat, we moved a lot, and I realized over time every community was always anxious to present a similar thing, something that represents their tradition and their sense of place. And we weren't always good about that, I think, in the 60s and 70s, and of course the National Historic Preservation Act was a big response to that. So, you know, we focus on the tangible when we try to describe things, and we talk about buildings and we talk about landscapes. But what struck me about it at some point when I was trying to explain to somebody that this isn't just about, you know, house museums, is it's about identity. So it struck me that it was really about identity and about who we are and the things that we think both express who we are, but also who we become in response to. And so that really our whole world around us becomes both a teaching syllabus, but also a way for us to represent, you know, who we are and our background, and in a way easier to do that than to try and put all those things into words. So Bernd Forrester put out a film during the NHPA controversy about the federal bulldozer and communities undergoing urban renewal, and it was called What Will We Tear Down Next? And there's almost no words in the film. It's music, it's a soundtrack. The only words are the interviews of the people who lived in these communities. But it's the steady dismantling and deconstruction of neighborhoods. And that, to me, said a lot about what historic preservation and cultural resources are really all about. It's not about the big house on the hill. It's not about, you know, it's not always about great moments in history, that it's also about who we are. And I think at that point I really understood why I found these things so engaging, because they're in part how I learned every time I moved or anywhere I went about the people. And people's stories always emanated and were reflected in those cultural resources. So now I feel it's very important that the work I do isn't just about taking care of historic buildings or sites. It's about trying to preserve and understand and allow those stories to be told.